Don't worry, Mr. Chomps. She can't hurt you anymore. Greetings, Sentinels fans. Mr. Chomps doesn't like this particular villain. She blew him up several times. It was kind of traumatizing for him. So anyways, I'm going to keep him company while I talk about my next topic. I've been wanting to examine some of the easier villains in the game, particularly the ones that were intended to be harder. So I decided to start with Chokepoint. Sentinels ranks its villain difficulty on a scale of 1 to 4. 1 being easy, 4 being difficult. There are 3 villains that had a higher difficulty at the start, but were later reassigned to difficulty 1s. Chokepoint is one of those villains. She was originally a difficulty 2 villain, and was the primary impetus for the termination event in the lore, causing investigation into the corruption of the American government and the secret experiments under Fort Adamant. Chokepoint is a ferrokinetic. She controls magnetism, and can move iron around at her whim. However, unlike Unity, who uses her ferrokinetics to make robots, Chokepoint uses hers to steal equipment and make armor. When I heard this for the first time, I thought she was going to be a major threat, since setup is a major aspect of the strategy of the game. And to be fair, she is very good at breaking your setup. With 14 cards involved with breaking your stuff, and 3 more cards involved with stealing stuff straight from your hand, she is well equipped for disruption. She doesn't have full-on wipes like the core game villains do, though this is possibly one of those occasions where a full wipe might be appropriate. More on that later. So if she is so good at disrupting setup, what is holding her back? Well, it's kind of simple really. Damage potential. Chokepoint doesn't do as much damage as she should in order to be a major threat. Let's break this down. You'll note that Chokepoint is one of those decks where there is only one target, the character card. This means she has to work harder in order to be a threat. Other villains who have other targets for heroes to worry about tend to spread the responsibility for both offense and defense. They share in the hurting, and they share in the getting hurt. And targets are generally made to be dangerous to have around, in order to give an incentive for heroes to focus away from the main bad guy and onto them. Lone wolves like Chokepoint, however, do not have that advantage. Therefore, they have to do something in order to make up for that. They can do it the Plague Rat and Progeny method, or the Plague Progeny method, of dealing overwhelming amounts of damage to everyone in sight. They can do the Spite method of presenting an insurmountable defense while doing marginal damage, or they can do the Iron Legacy method where it's an insurmountable defense on top of overwhelming damage to everything in sight. Chokepoint doesn't really do these though. She seems to do marginal damage and doesn't really focus on her defenses as much. It's a similar problem that Deadline and Kismet have. They are light on defenses and don't really have sufficient damage to compensate. Now, when they do get their defenses running and an attack engine going, they can be pretty deadly, but they are vulnerable to blitz tactics until they get there. Chokepoint in particular has some disadvantages here. In terms of defenses, she has a couple of cards that reduce damage to her, and an attack that allows her to heal either 5 points of damage or 15. Mr. Chomps has been a victim to that particular attack a few times. That's very good in terms of healing, but her defense needs work. Also, on her flip side, she gets an attack boost and a defense boost against heroes whose stuff she stole. In terms of offense, she scales quickly but caps off quickly too. Her character card has her deal a small amount of damage on her front side, H-1, and a larger amount of damage on her flip side, H+1. This isn't really significant. It's just so she's dealing damage on turns where her card doesn't do so. And by the way, she has 7 cards that don't deal any damage. So a quarter of her deck does not deal damage. The rest of the time she is dealing damage in decent amounts, but not much guaranteed area of effect damage. Ireful Grasp only hits targets who don't have equipment, and Shocking Animation can be destroyed before it activates. The rest of the time the damage is only in 1s and 2s. Heck, 1 instance of damage, even if it's a lot of damage, is very easy to guard against. And once she scales to her top performance, in this case flipping her onto her reverse side, she doesn't really have much more to do except deal damage, break setup, and hope the math falls in her favor. Another thing to mention is, while most of her deck is designed for setup destruction, she doesn't often break your stuff in large quantities. She's usually destroying 1 or 2 things at a time. This means that she can't break your stuff faster than the heroes can set up, which is a good thing, because not having enough setup can make a hero feel weak. However, this wouldn't do enough to set the heroes back. It can end up in a situation where heroes place burner cards in play, setup cards that they don't need, or would be destroyed anyways in order to act as a buffer to protect the stuff they care about. A full wipe, like we see in the early decks, can change this behavior so they form backup plans and hold on to replacement setup cards. Though the issue here is that when the wipe does happen, the players don't find it very fun, and they have to spend a lot of time building back up to where they started. I think Progeny and Akash Buddha have good compromises here, where they have cards that destroy a large number of setup cards, but they don't destroy all of them, leading to situations where players must prioritize what stuff they keep or destroy, or lose everything if they don't have enough stuff. I feel like I'm starting to emulate a George Carlin skit. So having cards like those would certainly increase Chokepoint's threat level and go a little closer to showing the threat she was supposed to be from the lore. Another point of interest that doesn't necessarily prove my point, but I want to talk about it. When Chokepoint destroys your stuff, it doesn't go to the player's trash, but is instead placed face down in the villain play area, signifying her using your stuff as armor. This has the possibly unintended effect of essentially taking cards out of play. Now normally this isn't really significant, but it can make a difference if you intend on getting those cards back through the use of Reclaim from the Deep or other methods of summoning the cards from the trash. If they are in Chokepoint's play area, then they are staying there until Chokepoint decides to destroy them on her flip side. It is technically more significant than just destroying the stuff. This can also matter a lot for characters that want stuff in their discards, like Luminary and Tachyon. On a final note, while Chokepoint, and other villains I plan to get to, was accidentally made too easy, she did get revisited later. In her case, it is in the form of her challenge rules. When each villain was made, they were given optional advanced rules for people wanting a harder game. Later, they went back to each and added additional challenge rules. In the case of Chokepoint, they gave her challenge rules that radically increases her damage output by dealing 2 damage to every hero every time she steals something from them. This turns her from a minor threat into a machine of destruction, much more worthy of her power in the lore. So in conclusion, Chokepoint is good at breaking your stuff quickly but not in large quantities, has some decent defenses but not a whole lot, and doesn't deal enough damage for it to feel like she's getting the better of the heroes. However, implement her challenge rules and her threat level shoots up several notches. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Mr. Chomps is feeling a lot better now, but if you want to send some support his way, he'll certainly appreciate it. Take care, friends. Alright, let's get this party started! Oh yeah, suck myself up. Woo! I'm silly. With 4 cards involved breaking your stuff, and 4? That's not a 4, that's a 14. Learn to read, Brian. And once she scales to her top performance, in this case flipping her onto her back, shut up, and targets are generally made to be dangerous to have around in order to give an incentive for heroes to focus away from the main bag. That was a long sentence, Brian. I am kissing this tiny robot plush a lot. This is my 3rd take so far. I am a weirdo who is kissing a toy robot T-Rex that is a spin-off merchandise from a card game. This is my life now.